So here we are in the middle of it all in Washington. Tonight, what do you know? Friday night, 6 o'clock, right before a major holiday break, right before Congress is about to head out of town, and basically a time-honored tradition. Pass a spending bill. What it all means and what's in it. It's Top in the Hill on NewsNation tonight.
It's time to fund our defense and aid for our farms and disaster relief to protect our very own citizens from harm.
A last-minute, stripped-down deal, a plea from Republicans to their own. And tonight, a time-honored tradition, you could say, in these parts, Congress passing a spending deal before the year is up. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. So you just saw the breaking news there. The House passing this spending bill. A lot of intrigue, really, to this. And we're going to dive into it here on The Hill because this was nearly split right down the middle among Democrats and Republicans, the number nearly identical voting for it. So up next from here comes a vote in the Senate, and President Biden, the White House, moments ago signaled that the president has the support of this bill. And just like that, it's basically on to the next year. But let's step back here for a second, because yes, there was a funding bill. Yes, there was a lot at stake. Yes, for North Carolina, for farmers, for government workers, all of that which we have covered here over the last 48 hours or so. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, all the intrigue. But here's what these 2 days have also exposed. Watch.
Congratulate yourself because it's shorter in pages, but increases the debt by $5 trillion is asinine.
That was a Republican who you just heard from. The Texan Chip Roy on the floor last night. What we're watching essentially is a window potentially into 2025. House Republicans, more than 24 of them voting against it tonight, with basically the exact same margins that they will have next year. Trying to see what can pass, who in their party objects to what, and how all that fits in with then President Donald Trump. Remember, it was Trump today who wrote that if there was going to be a shutdown, he said, of the government, let it begin now under the Biden administration, not after January 20th under Trump. Tonight, there's a lot of angry Republicans at more spending, adding to the debt, all of it inflationary, they say. We're going to take you live to North Carolina here on the Hill in a moment as the Southeast awaited aid. There's $100 billion in aid because of those devastating storms that we saw earlier this summer. We're going to take you to North Carolina, in a moment. But we begin with our Joe Khalil live in the Capitol hallways once again for us tonight. Joe, lots of movement here. The zoom in is they passed the bill. The zoom out, 2025 ain't going to be easy for Republicans.
That's exactly right. I think you hit the nail on the head, Blake. While we were waiting all day to see what the outcome of the bill is and whether there was a shutdown, now that we know the result of that, it's time to look back and think, okay, what lessons did we learn? And I think if you're Speaker Mike Johnson, what you've learned is that it is entirely possible that even if Donald Trump puts his foot on the pedal and wants to push forward on big pieces of his agenda, it is entirely possible that they're going to need to rely on Democratic votes in many cases to get things done. This morning, there was a Republican-only conference meeting led by the Speaker. The goal of that meeting was to see if they could figure out any other mechanism to sort of give an olive branch to the dozens of Republicans voting against their own bill to see if they could do it in another way where they wouldn't need Democrats. Ultimately, leadership on the Republican side came out of that meeting with the realization that it wasn't going to happen. Hence, they had to do it this way, where you needed 290 votes, 2/3 of the Congress, and you needed to at least get Democratic input. Now, also on the other side, Hakeem Jeffries, what did he learn? I've been told by several Democratic sources he felt blindsided because the bill that had been negotiated for months, that 1,500-page big stack, was sort of swept under the rug after just a couple of Elon Musk tweets or posts on X. Now, whether that's actually true, whether that was the influence, what Jeffries has learned now is that it's still going to be a raucous situation for him, and that he is going to have serious trust in Speaker Johnson if they're going to move forward and do things. But this was a pretty chaotic day here, Blake.
Joe Kay, live for us in the Capitol hallways. Joe Khalil, thank you. In a moment here, I'm going to be speaking with one of the Republican members of Congress who voted against this bill. But as Congress clearly just took up this measure, and one of the things at the core of it all was, how do you help those in the battered Southeast who dealt with Helene, who dealt with Milton, who need the aid, and who Washington took month after month after month to try to figure out how to deliver it? How do they view all of this? To our friends down there in Queen City News, Andy Weber, who's with our Nexstar local station in the Charlotte area. Andy, hello. I wonder from your perspective, we just saw Washington do Washington, Andy, but down there in the Carolinas, how are they viewing this tonight?
Well, Blake, I believe they're happy with this relief that is being offered to North Carolina and to all the states that have been affected by natural disasters in the last few months, as well as recent years. Senators in North Carolina say they wanted this disaster relief package to be part of this overall budget bill, and they seemed happy about it in previous interviews we've had with them. We know for a fact that $9 billion of it will go towards North Carolina, which of course is very crucial, as the western parts of the state are still on a long road to recovery here.
Andy Weber with Queen City News, our Nexstar station down there in Charlotte, North Carolina tonight. Andy, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it. Joining us now here on the Hill is Congressman Eric Burlison, a Republican from Missouri, who just voted no on this bill. Rush to the cameras, Congressman. Appreciate the hustle. Appreciate you being with us here on the Hill. You're a Republican who voted no. Tell me why.
You know, I come from a district where people want this town to change. They want to see spending go down. They want to see spending cuts. They want to see the debt go down. And so my district, I made a promise that I wasn't going to raise the debt ceiling. I wasn't going to add to our national debt. And so I've consistently voted against those things, consistently voted against continuing resolutions, because it's not the way that we need to do things up here. We're supposed to actually pass the 12 appropriation bills, and we're not doing our job.
So you didn't want the short-term bill, which was what Mike Johnson put forth. You didn't want to raise the debt ceiling, which is what Donald Trump wanted. As a Republican who was just elected in an election in which Donald Trump just won the popular vote, Congressman, are you willing to say tonight that Donald Trump is wrong on the debt ceiling? And are you willing to say tonight that Mike Johnson was wrong to put this forward?
I think that the votes weren't there to begin with for the debt ceiling vote. I mean, they would have to get it through Chuck Schumer. They were not going to get that done. I think that it was foolish to put that vote on the floor, knowing that it was going to fail. But at the end of the day, I'm sticking to what my district sent me up here to do, which is return to some level of fiscal sanity. And right now, this isn't it. And so I'm going to continue to vote my conscience and vote my district, and I will do everything I can to fight for Donald Trump's agenda within that framework.
Does your conscience, does your district tell you that Mike Johnson should be the Speaker of the House come 2025?
I think Mike Johnson went up a notch in my mind today.
How so?
By doing what needed to be done from the beginning. I was part of the discussions earlier this morning with J.D. Vance and the Speaker in their office, and what was good to see happen and brings me a little bit of hope is that he brought the members into the room so that we could share our opinions, share our thoughts, and provide different paths for the Speaker. That's what's necessary. Sadly, this 1,500-page monstrosity that came forward at the beginning of this week there was no members involved in those debates or those negotiations. That was all done by staff. And so that's not going to work, especially with a slim majority. You're going to have to engage all the members of the conference, or at least a segment of the members of the conference, in order to get some buy-in.
Congressman, Republicans, rightfully so, as they should have been, were jubilant on November 5th. Won back the White House. kept control of the House, flipped the Senate. You've got control of this town for the next 2 years, at least starting January 3rd in the House and January 20th for full control when Donald Trump comes in. But I just watched this exercise. I just watched a couple dozen Republicans, including yourself, vote against this. You're going to want to do taxes. That's spending. You're going to need to pass another spending bill. That's spending. Why should we believe that you guys are going to be able to do any of that next year when I just saw Republicans, a lot of them, including yourself, sort of buck the party? And you know what Democrats are going to do next year. They're not going to help you.
Yeah, and look, keep in mind, we're not in control right now. We still have to deal with Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer. But you're right. In a few weeks, we will have the authority to make some different decisions, and the conversation changes at that point. And so I think what was very healthy that came out of the discussions that we had this morning was discussing a framework going forward, a tentative agreement on the structure of what we're going to see in these reconciliation bills, and it means meaningful cuts. Meaningful cuts is discussed in this, and I think that the president and his administration is serious about it.
Congressman Eric Burleson of Missouri. I'm told that Mike Johnson is moments away from the microphones. We got to leave it there. I'm sure you want to listen in as well. Thanks for being with us here on The Hill. Appreciate it, sir.
Merry Christmas.
To you as well. Chris Stirewalt, host of The Hill Sunday, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, joining me now. So too is Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House chief of staff, NewsNation contributor. Guys, I might jump in. You know why. Chris, let me start with you. The takeaway tonight for Chris Stirewalt is?
The party, as the song goes, the road goes on forever and the party never ends. This is how Congress has been now for quite a long time.
Washington did Washington.
Washington did Washington. And for Republicans who were triumphant and jubilant that a new age of Donald Trump had dawned, and like a meteor, he would strike the earth and kill off the swamp and do all that stuff. That didn't happen. But for Democrats who were telling us that fascism was on the march and, the boot heel of oppression was coming down on our necks, 34 members of the House said, you know what? No, we're going to do our own thing. Right. And listening to Congressman Burleson thread the needle there and talk about, I want to implement Donald Trump's agenda, as far as I can as it relates to my district and my promise to my voters. Donald Trump got elected with a mandate. Sure, so did every member of the House and Senate.
Mick Mulvaney, you live in North Carolina. You're from South Carolina. You are well aware of the devastation in your region, of which you speak to us. Mick, hold that thought. Mike Johnson live.
Majority of votes, we passed the American Relief Act of 2025. This is a very important piece of legislation. It funds the government, of course, until March of 2025. That was a big priority for us. This is America First legislation because it allows us to be set up to deliver for the American people. In January, we will make a sea change in Washington. President Trump will return to D.C. and to the White House, and we will have Republican control of the Senate and the House. Things are going to be very different around here. This was a necessary step to bridge the gap, to put us into that moment where we can put our fingerprints on the final decisions on spending for 2025. We also, in this bill, as you know, took care of Americans who desperately needed and deserved the assistance. We had a record hurricane season. Hurricanes Helene and Milton in particular did dramatic damage across at least 6 states. The Carolinas, Virginia, from Florida, Tennessee, all the way through. And they had been waiting for the federal government to assist. We did that tonight in this bill. We also took care of our farmers, many of whom were on the brink of collapse because of Bidenomics, frankly, because the inflationary cost of their inputs and the inability they have right now to get loans from the banks and the lenders to put their crops in the ground, to put the seeds in the ground in the spring. So we had to take care of that, and we did. We are excited about this outcome tonight. We're grateful that everyone stood together to do the right thing. And having gotten this done now as the last order of business for the year, we are set up for a big and important new start in January. We can't wait to get to that point. We encourage swift passage in the Senate now. They need to do their job as the House just did. We will all go home. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, and and a happy new year, because I hope not to see you until we get back after that. I was in constant contact with President Trump throughout this process. Spoke with him most recently about 45 minutes ago. He knew exactly what we were doing and why, and this is a good outcome for the country. I think he certainly is happy about this outcome as well. Elon Musk and I talked within about an hour ago, and we talked about the extraordinary challenges of this job. And I said, hey, you want to be Speaker of the House? I don't know. He said, this may be the hardest job in the world. I think it is. But we're going to get through this. We are going to unify this country, and we are going to bring the America First agenda to the people beginning in January. We cannot wait to get started. I hope you all have a great holiday.
All right, so you've been listening live to the Speaker of the House there, Mike Johnson, after this spending bill passes. Mick Mulvaney, come on in. I've got a couple observations there. Chris Steyerwalt, host of The Hill, with me as well. Mick, one of the big pieces of this was disaster funding, and I mentioned you're in Charlotte right now. That's the region that's been hit. $100 billion for disaster funding tonight. It took Congress a little while to get there, though.
It did, but it's also part of the false narrative that contributes to how you get $36 trillion in net. I know that sounds a little bit heartless, but give me 30 seconds to explain. There was no reason for that the disaster bill had to be attached to the CR. It's called a sweetener. It sort of shames people into voting for something they don't want to vote for. They attach it to the CR. You don't like the CR, but they go, oh, goodness gracious, if you vote against the CR, you're voting against disaster relief, or you vote against the farmers. You don't want to do that, do you? You have to vote for the whole thing. It's one of the reasons that people get so frustrated with how the House works, regardless of which party is in control. If you voted against the spending last year, and many Republicans did, you have to ask, why did you just vote for the spending right now? Because what all this does is takes last year's spending and move it to next year, at least the first 3 months of next year. So that texture sort of explains, why Washington is so frustratingly difficult to operate in.
Mick, you know Donald Trump very well, and you just heard from Mike Johnson there say he spoke with Donald Trump in the last 45 minutes. Yeah. What do you believe Donald Trump is thinking tonight?
Oh, listen, I believe they're in constant contact. And my guess is, and it's an educated guess, what they were saying is yesterday, Michael Johnson probably told Mr. President, I'd be more than happy to put this on the floor. It's going to fail, and I want you to know that. And I need you to back me up and not tweet out that I'm doing bad leadership because I put your bill on the floor. It's going to fail. I mean, what did we see last night? Everybody on the show last night knew how this was going to end. Mm-hmm. It was going to be a cleaner bill to get rid of the debt ceiling, which is exactly what happened. And I think that's probably what Mike Johnson told the president last night.
And that's why I've been sort of zooming out on the future here. Chris, real quick, the one thing that I noticed, that was a pretty big smile on Mike Johnson's face. And I just had Eric Burlison tell me he thinks more of Mike Johnson after this. What's his standing going forward?
I think he lost a lot of ground with Democrats for deal-making going forward, but I think he's gained some ground with Republicans. But remember, how many votes can he lose and still win the Speaker election next year?
2 or 3?
He can afford to lose 2.
Right.
And there's already one, Thomas Massey from Kentucky, who says he's a no.
Okay.
So it's going to be tight.
Chris, I'll see you later in the show. Mick, see you later in the show as well. Appreciate it. Still to come here on The Hill, the drone mystery drama, what's really up in our skies. Ross Coulthart, live on the other side of the break, plus the new definition of healthy, what the FDA is doing that could impact your food choices, and on strike. Workers at Amazon hit the picket line. So too at Starbucks. What's that all about? Welcome to Washington. You hear me say this all the time, but this is the center of politics. You're watching The Hill. We're back in a few. On NewsNation, the nationwide sightings of mysterious drones continue to baffle folks all over the country. And the Federal Aviation Administration is now stepping up. The agency implementing a drone ban in parts of New York City and Long Island. It comes just hours after a similar ban in New Jersey. Joining us now, NewsNation special correspondent and investigative journalist Ross Coulthart. Ross, thanks for being with us tonight. Appreciate it. Always great to speak with you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Blake.
So we've spoke to a lot of folks this week here on this issue. I wanted to get your reaction to 2 in particular. I had Leroy Chow, who is an astronaut and has been on the International Space Station. So he has an idea of what's up in our skies. And here's what he told me about an incident that happened to him earlier this year. Watch.
To me, it seems like it's some kind of a military program, our military program. And if it's not that, then it gets a little more scary. It's like, well, is this some kind of a bad actor state probing us and seeing what they can do?
So that was his best guess. He also said he had some orbs flying around him. What do you make of what Leroy Chow told us?
I think it's very interesting because it accords exactly with what I'm hearing from people in the FBI, Homeland Security and Defence on the ground in New Jersey and other parts of the East Coast. We're now not just talking about what you would call conventional drones, Blake. These are objects that in some cases are luminous orbs, golden luminous orbs. And nobody tells me that they are what they think are drones. Increasingly, it looks like the authorities are backing down on what they've previously assured us, that these are legal craft. As recently as 3 days ago, they said categorically that everything in the air were either unmanned or manned craft that were legally flying. And we now know, because of the ban, that's not the case at all.
Fair point. I had Joe Franciscan. Joe was in the Pentagon, senior official there, basically oversaw special ops and counterterrorism during his time there, deputy chief of staff as well. And here he was on the national security threat.
This is absolutely a national security threat, and it's a shame that it's taken so long for the feds to get out in front of this and addressing it head on. It's not inconceivable to think that these drones could be used for more nefarious purposes than the possible surveillance that we're seeing in New Jersey today.
Right. How big of a national security threat do you think this is for the United States, Ross?
Blake, I think this is extraordinarily important. If they don't know what these objects are, and that's what they're admitting, how on earth can they give us any assurance that there's no national security threat or public safety risk? That's the issue. We still don't know what these objects are. Some of them, and you'll see this in our special report this weekend, are 3 to 5 meters wide. They are nation-state, in the words of our informants, nation-state-sized drones. This is serious because the only people capable of putting this kind of technology up are well-resourced nation-states.
Ross Coldhart, we're short on time because of the big news here out of Washington, but I will be watching this weekend. Ross Coldhart live with us. Thank you, sir. We'll have our eyes here on NewsNation. Appreciate you, sir. So stay with NewsNation for the latest on the mystery drones. Special report, Drones Over New Jersey, hosted by Ross, airing tomorrow right here on NewsNation, 9 p.m. Eastern. You're not going to want to miss it. Check it out. Thank you, Ross. Still much more ahead. Here on the Hill, President Trump takes office in a month. But did he get one of the biggest country music stars in a little bit of heat? Plus, record high deportations. The United States expels the highest number of illegal immigrants in a decade. Really? During the Biden administration? So why the big change? The former director of ICE, when we return. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Donald Trump and Joe Biden moving in different directions. And what is considered healthy? The government now has a new meaning. Our Hannah Brandt is here with what is happening in and around the Capitol. Hello, Hannah.
Hey, Blake. A lot of people right now counting down until Christmas, but there's another countdown here in Washington we're paying attention to. Just 31 days until the official change of power here, and we're getting some new insight into how Americans perceive both the top Democrat and the top Republican. Check this out. A new poll from Marquette University Law School shows only 34% of the country looks favorably upon President Biden. That is an all-time low in that survey. Meanwhile, 53% of those polled now say they approve of how then-President Trump handled his first 4 years. But is appearing alongside Trump backfiring for one celebrity? Country music star Jelly Roll is dismissing the criticism that he got for greeting Trump at a recent UFC event. Jelly Roll saying there's no chance he wasn't going to take the opportunity to meet the incoming president, and adding he would have done the exact same thing if it were President Biden. And here's some food for thought. What's healthy? Lost in the headlines in the middle of this whole government spending battle is a big move from the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA announcing it's changing the criteria for foods to be labeled as healthy. Now it's placing limits on added sugar and changing the emphasis from nutrients like vitamins to food groups like vegetables and whole grains. So what does that mean for your grocery cart if you want to follow this new guidance? Food the FDA now labels healthy includes salmon, nuts, seeds, olive oil, eggs, along with fruits and veggies. And that's what's happening in and around the Capitol, Blake.
This had been in the works for quite some time, but I don't know. It comes also as RFK Jr. is about to come here potentially to Washington, and you got to wonder about the timing here a little bit.
Exactly. Make America healthy again could mean something totally different from this new FDA healthy label.
Yeah, it's this movement. It's not really right or left. I mean, you have all sorts of political components coming together, and it seems as if the FDA, whether it has any sort of tie to RFK Jr. or not, they're listening to what's going on out there.
Sure. And what we've heard from both Democrats and Republicans is that RFK Jr. has some important things to say on things like the chemicals that are going into our foods, into our packaged snacks. And that's something he wants to change. And it seems like the FDA is hearing that as well.
Hannah Brandt, see you later in the show. Thank you, Hannah. Appreciate it. So here's something you might not have expected from Joe Biden's administration. New numbers from Immigration and Customs Enforcement reveal that more migrants were deported in the past year than at any point over the previous 10. According to those ICE figures, more than 271,000 illegal immigrants were deported in fiscal year 2024, even slightly higher than in 2019 during the Trump administration. That includes illegal immigrants from 192 countries. About 30% had some form of criminal history. Ron Vitello was the former head of ICE in the Trump administration. Will join us here in a moment. But first, our Jorge Ventura live in Oklahoma with what the Republican governor in that state is now trying to do. Jorge?
Blake, so Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt says that he wants his state to lead in assisting the incoming Trump administration when it comes to mass deportations by fast-tracking the deportation of illegal immigrants incarcerated in the state's prison. Oklahoma now launching an operation called Operation Guardian. It's the first operation of its kind with the goal of transferring those illegal immigrants from the state prisons like the one right behind me into federal custody. Oklahoma says that right now there's around 526 illegal immigrants in the state's prison, costing taxpayers around $32,000 a day. They say they want to remove those individuals and put them on federal custody. Now, Governor Stitt did tap Public Safety Commissioner Tim Tipton to lead that operation. I asked the commissioner if that Operation Guardian could also be expanded. He says yes. He says after that priority of deporting those illegal immigrants that are in the prisons, that they also want to target illegal immigrants that have served time in prison and are still in the state. They want to transfer those individuals to ICE. I asked the governor directly if he expands to also expand that operation to include undocumented immigrants who are not committing crimes and are paying taxes here in the state of Texas. He in the Oklahoma, I mean, he says no. He wants to focus strictly on criminals. Here's some of that answer from Governor Kevin Stitt earlier today.
People that are trying to chase the American dream, they're paying taxes, they're part of the community. We want to make sure that they have a way to work here legally.
And the governor also saying that Commissioner Tipton will present him a plan by January 15th. He also including when it comes to heinous crimes like rape and murder, those illegal immigrants will serve that state prison and then be transferred to ICE. Blake.
Jorge Ventura live for us in Oklahoma tonight. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Joining me now here on the Hill, Ron Vitello, the retired acting ICE director, former chief of the U.S. Border Patrol. Hello, nice to see you again as always, sir.
Thanks for inviting me.
10-year high in the last year, higher than at any point in Trump. It basically reached an Obama level from 2014, 270,000 plus. I went to the dictionary. I didn't find the definition of mass deportations. But as the highest in 10 years, could you say that is mass deportations?
No, I don't, because the priorities of this administration have not been focused on the border or removing criminal aliens and they've allowed sanctuary cities to exist without taking any steps forward. So this is in the context of 2.9 million encounters at the border in FY24. So these numbers are, they meet these historic highs, but in the backdrop of almost 3 million people.
So you're saying more came in, so it was essentially easier to deport more.
And a significant portion of the numbers that are reported today are people who were turned back at the border itself.
So if 270,000 were deported last year, what can Donald Trump reasonably What should reasonably be expected for his administration? Because the Biden administration didn't take the southern border seriously until there was the election.
Correct.
Right? And that was sort of basically this fiscal year. So if the Biden administration could do that, what do you expect out of the Trump administration?
Well, at least double. You're going to have to do everything, right? You're going to have to scale up. You're going to have to fix the border. You're going to have to scale up the ability for ICE to find people who are in the country illegal who have also committed crimes. So what the governor of Oklahoma is talking about is leaning in on the criminal aliens that are already in custody. We want that. The Trump administration is going to want to scale that up across the country. Every institution, every jurisdiction that has somebody that's in the country illegally who also committed crimes in their community on a path to removal. So you can really move the numbers up from there.
How do you get from that to at least double, as you just said? I think Trump actually wants it higher than that, right?
You got to find them. You got to safely arrest them. You got to detain them until, if some of them have the rights to a hearing, that give them those hearings. Got to scale up all of those elements and then scale up the transportation back to their countries. So that's repatriation agreements and that's transportation itself. But you have to have, like New York, the mayor is doing now. You have to have them leaning in.
What do you think's going on with Eric Adams?
Well,
because Donald Trump was sort of open to the idea of a pardon. He's got lots going on, but he also is taking the immigration issue head on.
Plus, he can read a poll. He's an elected official. He sees the people in New York agitated against what's happening with these, gift cards going out to illegal aliens, hotels being taken over, crime on the streets from gangs that we never even heard of 3 years ago. So, yeah, the mayor is leaning in because he knows it's beneficial for the city and for him as well.
Ron Vitello, always great to see you. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill. All right, still to come here on the Hill. The House voting to keep the government open moments ago. Don't you know, was basically the expected outcome, but lots of politics with this one. Trump, Johnson, Musk. Next goes to the Senate. What's Joe Biden saying tonight? Full panel, other side.
NewsNation special. Tomorrow, the drones over New Jersey continue. Mysterious sightings for more than a month with little action taken.
Objects that frankly defy explanation.
Ross Coulthard with the latest developments. Tomorrow on NewsNation.
Back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Been a big hour of news. Continues to be. Live look inside the Capitol. We're showing you that empty room and a podium. Why are we doing that? Because in about 15 minutes or so, Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat in the Senate, the top man in the Senate, expected to be speaking to the media now that the House has passed the government spending bill. Not a lot of, I don't want to say not a lot of intrigue here for the Senate, because Joe Biden has already come out and said, you know what, we support this, but we'll be hearing from Schumer any moment now. Full panel here with me now here on the Hill. Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff in the Trump administration, NewsNation contributor. Hannah Brandt, political correspondent for our Nexstar D.C. bureau. Chris Stirewalt, host of the Hill Sunday, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Scott Bolden, NewsNation political contributor. Hello to you all here and in person on a busy day. Did Donald Trump get what he wants? There were a lot of Democrats that came along with him. Came along with Republicans here. Scott, what's the thinking?
Well, they didn't want to shut it down, and it was a clean bill. And in the bill, you had the farmers got taken care of, and the relief funds were there, and that was enough for the Democrats. What's interesting about what happened this week is who's going to keep the Republicans together after January 20th, and are they going to need to share government or legislative control, at least of the House, with the Democrats to move their agenda forward?
So you're right to look ahead to 2025. I wonder how this showed a lot of the complexities, but on something like taxes, where there's going to be a lot of this.
Yeah.
Did tonight show that maybe Democrats could work with Republicans and Donald Trump, or no?
Not on
Chris
taxes.
Has already spoken
not on taxes.
Not on taxes.
But it'll be interesting.
Because the central question in this is how much power does Trump have over Republicans, right? Because he blew up the deal to begin with. But then on the second vote that we saw last night, 38 Republicans voted against it, despite Trump saying he supports it.
They voted against it fearlessly.
Yes. And then this time around, the third time around, we saw, again, a number of Republicans vote against it.
Yeah.
Mick, I thought that this was sort of a window into 2025 and the many complexities here. Going through Mike Johnson's head tonight, going through Donald Trump's head tonight is what at this moment as we await Chuck Schumer?
How do you pass your agenda? You folks are absolutely right. Keep in mind, this is not that different than what Nancy Pelosi had, I think, 2 or 3 Congresses ago. She had a margin of only 5, which is, again, very, very tiny. She didn't have this infighting because she only put bills on the floor that all Democrats supported. So I think the question is, can they find stuff that all Republicans support? That's going to be really difficult to do.
Can they?
I don't know because of the spending involved. So it's going to be very, very difficult on tax. Very, very difficult immigration. I think immigration is probably easier to do than tax because it doesn't involve as much spending. But no, it's going to be a real challenge. There's no question about it. And keep in mind, while Donald Trump has learned a great deal about how to run a government in the last couple of years, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are new to this. So they have to learn how to speak the language and understand the culture before they can really start to have a serious impact.
So in 2017, Chris, it was repeal and replace Obamacare, then taxes, then infrastructure. They got 1 of 3. 2025 is lining up to be do border, pass a government spending bill, and taxes. 1 of 3 gets you into the Baseball Hall of Fame, gets you, cut out of the NFL and the NBA. Where do you think this goes?
Well, I'm going to speak your language because Berman means business. The situation now for Donald Trump is dramatically different than it was before, which is that we have been in an inflationary cycle for quite some time now. And the wild drunken sailor spending of the COVID era that Donald Trump was part of, and then Joe Biden accelerated and Democrats accelerated. So, as the Federal Reserve has already said, they're worried about prices going up. The reason Donald Trump wanted the debt ceiling to be waived for 2 years was that Republicans wanted to go ape, right? They wanted to spend, and they wanted to cut taxes, and they wanted to push, and have Joe Biden get the blame for it. What the House Freedom Caucus did here and what those 34 Republicans did here is say, we're not going to go for it. We're not coming along for the party to go do this. The brutal realities of inflation, which is something that a decade ago people thought was over, that had been banished. Modern monetary policy, you could borrow and spend as much money as you wanted, and it had no effect on anything, and you could just mint a $10 trillion coin, and who would care? Donald Trump is going to care he's going to learn to care very, very much about the inflationary effects of spending and borrowing.
Meantime, 'twas the strikes before Christmas as workers at 2 major U.S. businesses walk off their jobs ahead of the busiest shopping week of the year. Amazon workers, members of the Teamsters Union at 7 delivery hubs nationwide, are striking for more money, better benefits, and to fix what they claim are unsafe conditions. Amazon says it doesn't expect the walkout to impact its operations. And if you're in need of a cup of Joe to keep you caffeinated, you may need to prepare for longer lines at Starbucks in Seattle, L.A., and Chicago. Baristas at 10 locations in those cities went on a strike, and that walkout could spread to hundreds of more stores. Scott Mulvaney, I've been saying this. I don't know why every single major union in this country wouldn't strike, because Bolden's Democrats back labor, and now you got the Republican in the White House, Mulvaney's old boss, who backs labor. Why not everyone strike? Get what you want. Do it.
Is that to me first? I'll take it. Keep in mind, in your mind, whenever you say unions, you can't paint with such a broad brush. I think Trump is still anti-teacher union service use. Let's talk about the manufacturer, people who work with their hands, right? Trump likes that. And I do think there's some ascendancy going on there right now. There'll be a small difference. Trump is very pro-union. There's no question about it. But the difference between Republican and Democrat administrations is the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, which during Democrat leadership is typically an advocate for unions. It's effectively free counsel. There'll be more of the independent arbiter under the Republican administration.
Yeah, I think the Amazon and Starbucks, they struck too late. They should have struck about 6 months ago before the election was up. But, the unions, a lot of the unions, the major ones, supported Donald Trump. We'll see whether he's supportive of them, because it's usually the inverse, as we know politically.
All right. Meantime, that major company, Starbucks, is a modern American success story, as you know. The first Starbucks opened in Seattle in 1971. 20 years later, they appeared in their first ever airport, Seattle's main hub. And just down the road from Seattle, across the waters of Lake Washington, is the city of Clyde Hill. Gives us a chance on this Friday evening to say hello from our hill to yours to those in Clyde Hill, a town of roughly a few thousand just outside of Bellevue. Clyde Hill is in Washington State's 1st Congressional District, represented by the Democratic Congresswoman Susan Delbene. So from our hill to yours, hello to those maybe having a cup of Starbucks right down the road in Clyde Hill, Washington. Steyerwalt, what you got coming up on the best Sunday show in the biz?
We'll be picking through the wreckage, of all of this and talking about what comes next. We've got Republicans, we've got Democrats, we've got raw excellence. It's going to be fantastic and a great panel.
Steyerwalt, The Hill Sunday, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on NewsNation. Mulvaney, thank you, sir. Have a great weekend. Merry Christmas. Thank you to you all as well.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Not done just yet. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, other side of the break. On NewsNation, live look again inside the United States Capitol. That's the Senate side of thing. Empty podium there, but we expect to hear from Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat, the Senate Majority Leader, any moment now after the House passed that spending bill. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance. Hello on a Friday night. This is Washington doing what Washington does, but the fascinating thing about this is it kind of shows the complexities and the struggles that Republicans could have next year, even though they control this town.
Well, they will control this town, right? And we saw, really, everyone cave in the face of Donald Trump's demands. Republicans did. Remember, 12, 14 hours ago, Donald Trump said, you will stay until